Welcome, and thank you for joining me on the Spiritual Ninja podcast, where we have heart to heart conversations with people who live with spiritual depth and elite performance. Welcome, Tia, to the Spiritual Ninja podcast. It's really a pleasure to have you here. I'm very interested in people's internal spiritual path, as well as how they achieve the high level of something on the outside and the convergence of these two. So I love hearing about somebody's start to their internal spiritual path. If you remember when that started, maybe what provoked it, and if you can share your internal journey.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's great to be here. And thank you for the opportunity. So I think my spiritual journey started when I was a teenager, probably sort of last year of school to around 17, 18. I was never a big reader, but I remember going through several books that were spiritual books and reading about the philosophy behind those books. The one was the Celestine Prophecy. I remember that one very well. Several other books along the way. And when I read those books, they're just logical. Like it just felt intuitive what I was reading and learning from those books. And something resonated within me. And I think it awakened the spiritual elements of my being. I would say that my spiritual journey is definitely one that's gone through ups and downs. I often think that whilst I've learned a lot along the way, I've lost also a lot of momentum along the way. But sometimes I realize that's probably part of the journey in the sense that, like life, we go through our ups and downs. So that was the start. And then I would say actually my martial arts gave me a lot of that awakening as well. When I was a child, I did karate. I think the karate wasn't necessarily the starting point. I think after my schooling, when I started Kung Fu, that's when I started to resonate even more with the spiritual journey because it's so multidimensional. And in particular, the breath component. So when you do martial arts, the breath is fundamental, like with other things. And the visualization and the realization that we are body, mind, and soul. So those teachings that the martial arts gave me basically brought another level of understanding of my spiritual journey. One that was just inherent. I didn't question it necessarily, but I, again, just realized it was there. Almost like that dormancy that was within me was just starting to awaken more and more. Then fast forward, I think I was always intrigued by meditation, but never really got to the point of actually meditating. However, when I think back, I've always been very active in my life, and I realized that meditation has various forms. One is the most traditional one where you sit and you quieten the mind. But for me, a moving meditation was inherent in the sports that I did. And I think I only realized that later in life, that it gave me so much tranquility and balance by doing those sports and calming the mind. That's what it's about, the meditation. Fast forward even more, when I was in my early 30s, I was able to eventually do a proper meditation course for 10 days in India, where I learned the technique of Vipassana. Vipassana is Buddhistic in its principles and helps. The technique itself trains the mind and the body and the cellular level to try and be detached. And through the process of detachment, also still the mind. And that process of Vipassana is about feeling sensation and then not having aversion to the negative emotions or sensations like pain or cramps or what have you, but also not having a craving for the positive sensations that run through our bodies, more of this tingling, joyous feelings, vibrational feelings. And so the meditation itself is not only a way which calms the mind through that intense concentration of focusing on the sensations, but also it's almost like a programming at a cellular level of how to be balanced in one's everyday existence.
I find that when I'm really resting in meditation, it feels very much like an internal home, and it feels like, wow, this is who I am. And then there are things, thoughts, feelings, whatever sensations, insecurities, fears that come up and they seem to blind or put a cloud over that experience of being home, even though they don't. That could be the perception of it. And at one point in my life, I really spent a lot of time learning to understand them and get to the root of them. So I almost learned to parent them in myself. And so now when they come up, I can be like, oh, that's just me being a person feeling afraid or insecure. And it's not a big deal. And I come back. Or if I need to look at something more, I will, but I kind of have a healthy relationship with them now. So I'm just curious for you, things that have come up internally, whatever they are, internal fears, insecurities, whatever it may be, when those pop up. I understand with meditation you're sharing, you kind of just see the sensation and not hold on to it. But how would you share the difference of when you're resting into the deepest sense of who you are and when these things come up, how you have a healthy relationship with them?
So it's a great question. I know when I'm truly resonating within myself and centered from the feeling that I get, where everything is just aligned. I'm together. I have really clear thoughts. I have really clear mind. I feel light. I feel confident. I feel happy, but at a very free level. And yeah, it's a lightness. It's like energy. The energy there's nothing heavy about it. And that's kind of that's the ultimate baseline. And what's one might ask, why I often do ask, so what triggered would allow those feelings to allow me to be in that state? And that state, by the way, could last only a couple of minutes or it could last longer. It wasn't obvious. It was like, I guess it was a culmination of various things coming together. I still don't know. It's a bit mystical, to be honest. And I've had them over my life in various shapes and forms. I remember one distinct time when I was 19, 20 years old in Cape Town, just going to the flea market. And I just felt this intense vibration within me. Ironically, I'd actually passed a bookstore, and I found a book on Kung Fu. And it was such a strange feeling because I felt like I need to get this book.
Yeah.
And I went to the store, the guy, the owner of the stand, and I said, can I get this book? And he looked at me, he's like, sorry, it's not for sale. It was really weird story. And then he, like a few seconds later, he looks at me and he's like, no, actually, no, it is. And it was just the weirdest thing. It's like, I'm going a bit tangential now, but it's like the universe. It's like suddenly the universe, that using the universal energies, it's speaking through me. That's the way I would describe it. Why, I don't know. And actually, to this day, I don't even remember what the book was, whether I actually read it entirely, but it was a message. Somehow I was transmitting something. It was like I was tapping into a higher existence. That's, I think, when I'm at that ultimate state. And I'm often realizing that I get that state when I'm in nature, surrounded by very positive natural energy, in a forest, on the water, in the water, in a beautiful environment, watching the sunrise, watching the sunset, just being in a very calm, tranquil, natural environment, but surrounded by nature. And again, it's that energy. It's like I suddenly feel like I'm connecting to a greater power.
The way you explain the meditation and your experience. So to me, that seems beyond both the positive, nice thoughts and the negative thoughts or the insecurities. It seems like there's something much deeper, one that's witnessing both of those things, the negative and the positive. The other part is when things come up that seem to interfere with it.
Hmm.
How do you personally deal with the things that come up? If you've come up with a way that you feel has allowed you to have a healthy relationship with your fears, insecurities, doubts, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, yeah. So starting with the first part, your observation's absolutely spot on. I think it's deeper. That profound feeling is so much deeper. I think it's the stillness that, again, maybe it's a few minutes, maybe it's longer. Like I'm able to just feel, it's like when the water's extremely calm, i.e. the mind. You can see right down to the depths. So, and I think that's what meditation's all about. What's interesting is I struggle most of the time with the traditional way of meditating, and I describe the Vipassana technique, probably not in the way I should describe it to give it its full credit, but you get to that, you're supposed to get to that depth, and I'm sure I would, right? But so it's strange that I kind of have felt moments of having that depth, which I'm sure I would get more of through the meditation, but I've felt it in moments where I've just suddenly it's just that I've got that alignment somehow. It's almost like the layers that affect us on a daily basis get stripped off. And I'm just like this being that can feel my essence. And so to your second question, I think that's the ultimate challenge. Like or definitely me and the way I live my life. I have a way of staying very busy. I have a way of doing too much. And I think that's sometimes a distraction, whether it's conscious or unconscious, I don't know. I'm going to pivot to the row and then come back to maybe how I find that balance. And I'll talk about the row in a bit of detail later. But I think one of my learnings through after having completed the row was simplicity, slowness, the slowing down, and gratitude. And those were three kind of distinct lessons learned that I gained from the row. So coming back to a question of how I get that balance, still not getting it right, but I'm realizing that when I do feel detached, when I do feel the opposite of not being aligned within myself and edgy and unnerved or just off, I take a step back and I kind of breathe. So the breath for me is the most basic tool I use to try and regain the sense of balance. And through the breath and being conscious of the breath, I immediately then can slow down and just focus again or recenter myself. So it's getting away from all the noise. And often I find in the circumstances when I am in that situation, it's a lot of external stimulus, where I feel pulled away from myself. And that helps me recenter again. So that's a process, of course, but I find the breath that fundamental tool to help me get there.
Great. So I wanted to bring up two things that you mentioned that thought very interesting. So it sounds like, let's say something comes up for you that throws you off center. Instead of saying, what is that? Why is that happening? You say, wait a second, I need to step back and connect to my breath. And then once I connect to my breath, that kind of falls into place naturally, into perspective for what it is, as opposed to having to figure it out or understand it so much, is one thing that I sensed you were saying. Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very accurate observation. I think the next part to that, once I'm a little bit more in a calmer state, is like the trying to self-reflect and be a little bit aware of, okay, what actually happened there. And through that process of learning or reflecting, getting to learn about me more, because I feel like that's one of the reasons why we're here. It's a process of self-discovery throughout our lives. So as we experience things, and that is part of that spiritual dimension, we learn about ourselves and growth. And then spiritual growth is maybe why we're here.
Yeah, what happened for me in relation to what you're talking about was years ago, I felt like I was in meditation a lot and felt very deep to me and like home, but certain things would keep pulling me out. And I was get frustrated, like, what's going on? Why am I reacting or whatever it may be? And so one day I decided I was just going to sit down and try to understand it. And I just sat in my meditation chair and I was like, why am I feeling jealous, for example? Oh, well, this person may like that person. Okay, what happens if that happens? And I kept asking these questions to myself. And everything I brought up, I got down to the fact of I'm afraid, like I'm not enough. I'm going to get hurt. I feel a little insecure or afraid. And I just got to the point of two things. One, okay, that's just normal. It's part of being a human being. And two, I asked myself, is there something that I know deeper in myself than that? And once I felt and realized that this place of being home feels deeper than that. And once I realized it was just part of being a human being, it was just normal to feel afraid, insecure, or whatever, it lost the power. It doesn't mean I don't still react at times and it doesn't come up. But if I just stop and say, oh, I'm just feeling insecure and afraid, that's understandable. And let me
Mm-hmm.
take a moment to reconnect to this deeper part of me, this deeper sense that feels like home.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you mentioned about meditation being challenging, I remember when I first started, I was so frustrated because I started like in this rigid way. You have to sit still and not move. And it was so tight. And I understand there's value in having structure because otherwise you could just jump all over. But I also today, what I try to do is I say, okay, I have whatever, 15 minutes. What do I think is going to help me the most right now? And it may be washing dishes. It may be exercising. It may be sitting down. It may be standing up. It may be nature. And so what I really try to support myself and others is to have different tools to take you into that place and to know which tools in general work for you and then to just be able to be flexible. And years ago, some guy came to me and he's like, I really want to learn to meditate, but I just can't do it. And he was frustrated. I said, well, tell me about your day. And the guy was amazing. He's like, well, I get up in the morning and I prepare myself tea. And he's telling me how he does the tea. And he goes, then, he retired. He goes, then I go out in my garden, I work on my garden, I do all these things. And then I go over and I surf. And he's explaining each thing, how he does it. And then I go into my gallery and I paint. And everything he explained to me, he
That's
was in
amazing.
meditation. And
Exactly.
I said, listen, you just explained everything about you being in meditation, just your idea of what meditation is. And if you consciously realize that, oh, when I'm doing this, I'm going into that place of not thinking and becoming one with the moment and being authentic and being in my heart. So I think this idea that some of us were indoctrinated with of sit still, don't move, it gets a little militaristic in something that should be natural into relaxing into who we are.
Well said. That's spot on, Jonathan. Honestly, like it's exactly that. It shouldn't have to be that rigid form because it's about that. It's the essence of connecting to ourselves and being in the moment in our hearts. Always.
100%. And the intention of this podcast, I'm just always going to be clear about this, is not about promoting me or my work or anything. It's about this conversation. But what I was going to say was when I wrote this book called Meditation Flow, the whole point of it to me was to say, hey, you can have a list of body meditations, of breathing meditations, of brain meditations, of nature meditations, of meditations with people. And you decide what is going to serve you best in this moment. And no one else knows other than you. And so to have that
Exactly.
freedom to adapt. And so I really
Yeah,
love that in anything.
I love that. And the more we get to know ourselves and the more self-aware we are, the more we'll be able to identify exactly that, the right tool at that moment.
And knowing in my experience of speaking with you before, seeing how you operate, there's so much with you in nature and which we'll get to your row and different things where you're really embodying somebody doing this in your life. And I understand the busyness. I get like that with things too. And I think it's just part of our survival instincts and our conditioning and the way we live today where things are fast. But also in my experience of you and seeing you, you also really know how to connect with nature. So you have intuitively a very great way of just connecting to meditation by going out and experiencing yourself as part of nature in the bigger picture. So I think that's, obviously a very clear path for you. And then when you talk about the breath of like everything you're doing with your exercise, whatever it is, connecting the breath to that, to nature, sounds like a really great um, open door for you. And
I think so. And it's been a realization that I've had over time. Is for being active outdoors isn't just because it's enjoyable. There's another layer to it that I realized, well, actually, this is what I'm getting out of it. It's my moving meditation.
when you spoke earlier about the meditation being on a cellular level with nature, we come from that. We are that. So whether our brain, like I can go out in nature and be thinking about something and not even realize I'm in nature, but my body is still getting the benefits of being in nature. But if I can be mindful of being in nature, be part of nature and breathing with nature, then like sometimes when I do Qigong or Tai Chi outside, it's this feeling that I'm moving with nature and it just feels so natural and so right. And so to me, that is a meditation because you're resting into who we are. Meditation isn't meant
I
to
agree.
be like a doing, it's to a resting into who we are. And
It's being
whether it's nature or whatever the vehicle is.
100%.
So another thing that for me that's really important in this podcast is that the internal yearning and searching and path of how we connect to a deeper place in ourselves, how we deal with our issues that come up and seeing the similarities and differences. And I think there's more similarities, whatever the religion or spiritual path is, or if it's nature, whatever it is, there's a lot more similarities than differences. And the other thing I've experienced being at times in a very worldly environment that was all about money and performance, people often say, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for self-help or personal development or spirituality. I'm just too busy. And then people that get really spiritual, and I've been around this too, will be like, oh, the world is all false. It's like everyone in the world's dead. And this is just the real thing that we're doing is spirituality. And in my experience, at some point, there was a convergence of this inner depth and wisdom, improving and enhancing everything on the outside. And then also, I know for some people, they get a clarity and then they completely change the direction of their life. So I know you've been very successful in your career, which you're more than willing to talk about, but also I think setting a world record in the toughest row in the world is also a huge feat for anyone to accomplish. I always feel that people that accomplish these, of course, they show up and they work hard and they train, but there's a depth on the inside that allows it to happen. And on the outside, there's got to be some kind of structure to getting to where they want to go, as opposed to just show. Like for me, for a while, I was just saying, "Oh, I'm just going to do my best in the moment." And it was beautiful, but then I'm not accomplishing anything because I'm just jumping around. Having some direction of where I'm doing that became very important. So I'm curious, you can share about your profession or just the rowing, but how you go from being where you're at to trying to accomplish a goal in your process.
Hmm. Hmm. So there's a lot, there's a lot in that. So I'll try and unpack this. I think starting from what you said in the beginning, it's all about balance. And you're absolutely right that we live in a three-dimensional world that operates with rules and regulations, and there's always the outer world and the inner world. And I don't think it's healthy to necessarily say it's one or the other. It has to be both. And finding that balance is a life journey. And that balance is very personal, firstly, but also that balance, the ratio between external and internal, changes over time depending on where we are at any particular point in time. So, so that was, I think, one of the realizations I had when there were times in my life where I got disillusioned by the corporate world, and especially sort of questioning a little, what is my purpose in life? Like why I'm just like kind of working for an insurance company in the corporate world, and is that all there is to what I'm supposed to be doing? Now, obviously, that's one dimension, the many dimensions. But I realized actually I don't have to necessarily go and dedicate my life to working for a charity to find that meaning. I can still earn money and be in the capitalistic world, but then find ways to give back in other ways. So that's where I realized it's about both. And I think that gave me a lot of peace to then still continue to pursue those external things while still realizing I do have certain values and certain things that are important to me. So I see those values as my rudder, and it gives me kind of the direction I'm in at any point in time, the how to be at any point in time. But then to realize, okay, it is about success. It is about setting up certain goals, because there's also an element of satisfaction in achieving those. So I think that's what motivated me around my career, wanting to do my best, generally just wanting to add value and do my best, regardless of where I was at the point in time. Um, and I think that's what helped me through my journey, my career journey. I didn't necessarily identify consciously, this is where I want to be, this is what I want to do. I just kind of took one step at a time with the aspiration of doing my best and growing and learning. Ultimately, there was always that underlying desire to learn and understand the world, and hence trying to understand me in the process.
Yeah, it's great. So everything you spoke about as far as the corporate world, when I was in college, I was doing some of that. I can really relate to what you said. And then as far as the world's toughest row that you did, maybe in bringing the convergence together, you can share about what provoked you to do this, and as far as the path of your training to be able to achieve this goal, and then also how your inner training of spirituality and meditation and the bigger picture and nature allowed you to get through some very, very rough times on the road, which you've shared with me before, and share with people your experience of all of that. 'Cause I think it's extremely inspiring and also can give people ideas of how to work through challenges internally and externally.
So I participated in a race across the Mid Pacific in June 2023. And how it came about, so if I go back 7 years ago, I learned of ocean rowing through a good friend of mine, Cameron, who had completed the Atlantic row through the same race organizer. And I'm like, what? Just you can row across an ocean? I just thought it was a crazy idea. But at the same time, I thought it was so enthralling and inspiring to just be out there in the middle of the ocean amongst nature. Again, the theme comes through. Doing something that is so challenging with the team where you're just being stretched beyond your boundaries and in an environment that is far beyond your day to day. I thought, wow, that's an amazing combination between the challenge, the physical challenge, the mental challenge, but also the environment, which is so unique. And then what you learn along the way about yourself, about the people you're with, about that journey. So it's like this intense concentration of all these feelings and challenges in a short space of time. It's just such a unique opportunity. So it was a thought in my mind, and one day I was able to do it through maybe the universe giving me that opening. It was a pitch, a dream pitch, which my employer offers, where you just pitch a dream. It can be anything under the sun, and they listen to all the pitches and they choose a winner. So I pitched to cross an ocean. I thought it would be the Atlantic at that point, or at least I pitched the Atlantic, and I won. And then I thought, well, this is actually going to happen, right? And then, long story short, Cameron, the friend I described earlier, came to me and said, "Let's join forces." And hey, by the way, why don't we do the Pacific? So it was a new opportunity. So I'm like, let's do it. We got a team together, and that was the start of a 2-year journey where I interviewed for the team. We identified a team of 4. It was supposed to be balanced, two women, 2 men. But for various reasons, it was landed up being me and 3 guys. And it was all about getting ready for the start line. And what that meant was preparing, of course, the basics, the mundane, like the logistics, getting the boat, getting the training done, getting all the whole project management side of things, getting that sorted. But then, of course, the physical training, getting the body strong, staying flexible, doing yoga, and being disciplined around sticking to a training regime, which we really intensified only about 6 months before the road. You can't start training physically too soon. You might then burn out. But more importantly, the row is a mental challenge. So it was all about getting to know each other, both in terms of how we act and how we operate on a daily basis, but also how we might operate when we're under stress. Because out there in the middle of the ocean, you're going to encounter that stress very frequently. We have all different characters. We were pretty diverse people. And so getting to know each other, spending time together. We had a coach who helped us, pushed us to ask the hard questions. And ultimately, it was about committing to the same goal. It's remarkable what a team can do when the team is aligned to the same purpose, the same goals, and is committed to those goals. So we made it our primary responsibility and primary priority to find what is that key objective that we want to deliver. And actually, we came up with 2. One is to finish as friends, and 2 was to be the best version of ourselves. So to finish as friends implied we were committed to ensuring that if we were having difficulties, we would address them. And if we're upset with someone, we would address it. We would absolutely consciously make sure that cohesion from an interpersonal perspective remained solid. And the second, to be the best version of ourselves, meant we were there. We were conscious. We were giving every moment the best it deserved. And that's what helps us also mentally stay so strong. So that was part of the training. But actually, part of the training was also coming back to the earlier theme about tools. Like, what can we do when we are stressed? Because inevitably, we're going to face very difficult times out there at sea when you have brute conditions, wet conditions, tough conditions, you sleep deprived, you're just fighting Mother Nature. It's tough out there. And so we also reminded ourselves of the importance of transience and realizing when it's a really difficult situation, it's not going to last forever. And that's what helps us to keep our minds focused on being in that moment and saying, okay, you know what, it's really tough now, but it's not going to be tough forever. And maybe the next shift it's going to be better, or tomorrow, or in a few minutes, few hours. So that acceptance of just being in that moment and saying, yes, I'm here, it's tough, but it's going to be okay. For the transients, but also the breathing, slowing down when we stress, and just being like that gratitude factor as well. Like, wow, we're just out there in the middle of the ocean. How lucky are we to have this experience? You have this profound exposure to Mother Nature without anything as a barrier. It's absolutely raw. There's no motors, there's no people around you, there's no noise, save for the natural noise of the environment and the team. Like there's so many gifts. I think one of the lessons I have learned in life is most things in life we can't control. But the one thing we absolutely can control is our attitude and our reaction and our perspective. So if something happens, you can look at it as with the glass half full or the glass half empty. So trying to just embrace that moment and see the positive, even in situations that are super brutal, there's something that you can get out that's positive. And that's one of the philosophies we try to remind ourselves of when we are out there. And inevitably you forget, right? So the human being, we forget these things. Speaking of when we disconnect from ourselves, but then we have the team and each other to remind ourselves, because inevitably once one person is down, like the other person's not. So we can help each other and lift each other up. Another amazing example of why a diverse team, diverse in terms of character, in terms of body, in terms of mindsets, in all ways, the more diverse a team, the stronger you can be as a unit, as a whole, if you really work together.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And when you're speaking, I was just kind of sensing, obviously you can't sense it because I wasn't there, but just being out there in the way you're talking about. And it just brought to my mind, intensifies the extremes of life, being one with the ocean and being with your breath and rowing and having moments where you just feel completely integrated with nature and yourself and lost in isness, if you will, fullness. And then moments where you're physically and mentally and emotionally at your edge, or you think your edge, or you maybe can't continue, and just everything is so stressed and so exhausted and all that. And then navigating the extremes of the human frailty of our mind, our emotions, our body, but then also the human expansiveness of our spirituality. And for 38 days, for 2 hours on rowing, 2 hours off, 2 hours on, 24/7, just must at times just morphed into one big day. And with the extremes of the agony of the pain, the physical, mental, emotional pain, but then at moments, the spiritual exhilaration.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's spot on. And the pain was very tangible, especially in the beginning. With the Pacific, the conditions were the toughest. Thankfully, I think it's better, mentally you expect that and then you fight to get through it knowing there's better things to come. Psychologically, maybe that's easier than the other way around, but it was still very tough. And the conditions were brutal. You had strong waves, strong currents pushing you back. It was cold water. We started in California. It was constantly wet because the conditions were so bad. We were sleep deprived and we were seasick, like everything at once you can imagine. That's all horrible and brutal. And especially at night, you will have to wake up after having had an hour of sleep. You get 2 hours off, but after those 2 hours, you'd have to spend time eating, cleaning your body, and doing what you need to do. So the sleep is like an hour. You absolutely dead tired. You're still probably in deep sleep, and you have to pull yourself out of deep sleep to get back on oars in dark, wet conditions,
Wow.
facing just horrible waves and wearing your gear that's was still half wet and your shoes are wet, and it's horrible. And again, so that reminding yourself that it's not going to last forever, right? And the transience of it was the only way I could cope. And then just saying, you know what, it's just the next shift, the next 2 hours, and even breaking those 2 hours down into like 15-minute intervals, it gets you through. and the cycle repeats. But maybe that's the beauty of life, where you can't really hard to experience the highs of life if you can't put the highs into perspective of what the lows look like. And so those highs, there were so many beautiful highs. And one which you alluded to was, for me personally, halfway through the journey, where one day it was just, there was no wind. It was much warmer, and the Pacific Ocean, there was nothing around us but water. It was like a lake, a silver, shining liquid lake. Not a ripple was in the water. The only ripples came from the oars going into the water. And I was just in this bliss where the rowing itself and the technique of the row was like a meditation. It was a meditation for me. And I was just in this zone. I was definitely in flow. It was the most magical experience that I still remember to this day so vividly. And at some point, we had to stop to check the altar helm, which controls the rudder. And the guys went into the cabin. So actually, I was the only one on deck. And I remember standing up. Of course, you're attached always with your harness to the jackstays of the boat. But I stood up, turned around, and just kind of peered over the bow of the boat. And the silence was deafening. It was absolutely the deepest silence. I realized what it meant to say silence is deafening. It was this the humming sound that just came through the universe. It was just permeated my being. I was just so overwhelmed, and that beauty was amazing. For me, that was one of the most vivid highlights, and it will stay with me forever. Other highlights were, the sunrises, the sunsets, the moon rises, the moon bows, the stars at night, which were vivid. Sadly, not as vivid as if you're in the African bush, where it's an inky black sky with studded diamonds. I think we had okay stars for some reason. I'm not sure, but it was not the same. I mean, there clearly wasn't any light pollution, but that beauty, of just finding those special moments in the day helped me through, but also what gave me so much joy. And to get back to your point, so you've got this amazing mix of such hard conditions and such brutal experiences with this amazing bliss and like joy that came with it as well.
Were there moments where you experienced like, wow, I just don't know if I can go on, thought, body, emotion wise?
Well, what the road did teach me was that the power of the mind will absolutely dictate what you can and can't do in life. And it's not to say we were super ninjas in having trained our minds for years on end to be able to endure this road. We're just ordinary human beings, but I think what helped was the fact that there was no plan B. And so you have one choice. You're either going to have a horrible 40-day plus experience if you let your mind think you can't do it, or you believe in yourself and you say, I can do this, and you allow the journey to pan out and you embrace the negatives. Back to Vipassana, you embrace the positives, but you let them go. You just let them be, and you stay in that moment. And because there's no plan B, I kind of got that. I just, that's what helped me through. A plan B is often not good in one's life because it's like, I can't do this. And then it's just easy as soon as there's this weakness, and we all go through weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. The temptation is there to just leave and elect the plan B. So I think that's what helps a lot. But ultimately, the realization and knowing before the race as well that the mind has to be with you all the way. Don't even allow those negative thoughts to crop up. Just believe you can, and break everything down into small bits. Because by doing that, your mind can then be with you and aligned with, okay, all I need to do is survive the next shift. Give my best for the next shift. You don't look more forward than that. And as human beings, I think we can often get caught up in looking too far ahead in life and forgetting to just be in that moment.
Yeah, right on. When you were earlier talking about the row, I was almost picturing like 1, 2, 3, just having to break it down to like threes or one row, like one and
Absolutely.
one. And it reminded me many years ago, this is nothing like what you did, but at the moment it was difficult for me. I have a friend that's like 6'3" and he's much, much heavier, bigger than me. And we were going up this really tall, steep hill. And somehow we got the idea for me to try to piggyback and give him a ride all the way up to the top of the hill. And his feet were like touching the floor because I'm so much shorter than him. But I couldn't, I mean, we literally just thought I would take a few steps and we kept both saying, just one more step, just one more step. And I was open to the idea of getting to the top, but I didn't really have that clear goal other than I'll just do the best I can. But it was literally like my body's shaking and we're like, just one more step. And then all of a sudden, one more step, we got up to the top and we're both like, wow, I can't believe we just did that, and
Absolutely.
it was really, really cool experience to have the overall goal, I guess you can say, but to really just be in that one step. So,
Absolutely. That is exactly right. And, no matter what the activity, that's, you describe it perfectly. It's just, you carry on, break it down. You don't focus on that destination. You just, at that point of being on that journey of one step at a time. Yeah.
so I have some other questions, but is there anything else you'd like to share about your experience in the row or any other things you'd like to just in general share about your internal, external path before I ask you some other broader questions?
No, I think we've covered a lot of things, and what I love is the convergence of all those themes because they appear in different ways, but the underlying meaning is still there, and the essence. Yeah, no, I think that's good.
Well, some of the broader questions, if you will. One is I'll speak for myself. Like when I got out of college, I was lost as far as on the internal and the external. Even though it looked like I was going down the successful path, I was clueless as far as an internal journey, and I was kind of clueless about actually looking at the external of life. Like, oh wow, what do I want to do with my life? What are my passions? What are my natural strengths? What do I feel would be a direction to go with for a career, for a path of that? And I didn't really have any that I remember any clear guidelines or directions or how to live, how to navigate my inner world and how to live on the outside in a way that felt fulfilling. So I'm just curious from your experience of life, if somebody was coming to you and like, hey, I'm kind of lost internally and externally, is there anything you feel like you could share? You've already shared a lot about this, but like in general or specifically to somebody asking those questions to you?
It's a great question, and certainly if I try and reflect on how to answer that based on my own life, I think you're going to really only share certain learnings, but it's a personal journey for everyone because meaning, what is meaning, it's a very personal thing. But what I have found is that we should being able to trust ourselves is really like the most important rudder, and the gut, the going with one's gut. And so I think I've done that in life as well. When I feel happy, I kind of know that the path is right. It's hard to just define, where should I go? What should I do in my life? Especially when you look out too far. I think it's about identifying what gives us joy. I think it's about identifying what we resonate with and what links with our values, and it's about self-awareness. And that's something that's constant. That doesn't just answer that once and then get all the answers. It's constantly evolving. I look back in my life, I've been successful in many ways in having achieved a lot of things, but I also feel like there's elements of my life where like I never regret anything, but I probably would have done things differently back then, knowing what I know now. And so I'm realizing it's our path on this earth is about that self-awareness and the growth. That's what it's all about. And being good people, reaching out, loving, having love, sharing love, being able to help people, because that's also about growth. And that's where also there's an element of fulfillment because we're spiritual beings. Being spiritual is also about understanding how energies interact and being part of a greater whole. So again, it's more than, so the happiness is one, but also just small things, the small things in life that count. Being kind, doing things that would just feel good. I think that's what
Yeah.
helps. And you kind of then figure it out along the way. It's about the journey again, and it's not really about where we should get to at the end. If you get to the destination without being conscious of the journey that got you there, I think the destination wouldn't have that meaning that it should.
Right on. It's who you're becoming along the way on your destination allows you to experience life from your perspective and who you are at the deepest level. And then wherever you're going, it's more about that awareness and that growth and that learning and that loving. And then you do what you do and you find your path. I think in doing and living that way, you're more likely to trust yourself and listen to your intuition, your instincts about what is your path for right now, or it's time to shift a path. And I think that's always has to be the reference point of getting quiet and trusting and trying to feel what feels aligned, who feels aligned for right now. If you have the opportunity to do that, maybe some people's situations, they don't feel like they have that, but we do have that choice internally of who we are and how we show up in the moment to life. And I think that's super important. This question, you've already answered it, but I think it's just a question that comes up for people a lot in spiritual path is, who am I and what am I here for? And why are we on this planet? What a miracle that any of this exists. And it's just mind blowing if you really think about it. But if you try to be like, well, what's the purpose of it? Or if there is a purpose, and why are we here? So I'm just curious. I know for some people, they feel like I'll never know that, so why even waste the time thinking about it? But for some people, like I'll speak for myself, when I look into that, it reminds me of a bigger picture in general and for me to connect to that bigger picture. So I've found it helpful for me. But I was just curious for you, that question of who am I and what am I here for? If there's anything you want to share about that.
Mm. I think it's absolutely the hardest question to even try and answer. Even the question itself is just so profound because it just goes to the core of our human existence. And yeah, this earth, wow, yeah, if taking that further, like we're just one small little speck in this massive infinite universe. And even our lifetimes, which can be 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years, let's say, on average, maybe 70, 80. It's such a little speck in the massive, millions of eras of how, long this planet's been in existence. So it's just becomes mind-boggling beyond any kind of comprehension for me. And so you're trying to break that down again into the basic building blocks. I think it's about growth, about trying to know thyself. It's about living joy. It's about giving back. It's about resonating with others. It's about sharing. It's about loving. It's about being kind. All the good things that just help us stay centered to what our essence is and who we truly are. That's not really defining a purpose per se, but maybe it is. So that I think that's what would be how I'd answer it. And those moments of joy, like I never had children, and in a way I would have loved to have a child because I imagine that's one example I believe where you absolutely give back in such an unconditional manner and going to help a being grow and be there in every shape and form for a child to grow and develop into the best version of themselves. But even if you put that aside, for us as individuals, yes, it's just about being the best version of ourselves, and through that process. So if everyone had that simple motto and mantra, imagine how the earth would buzz
Huh.
with such positive energy. It would like almost become a fireball of its own. So that's kind of the way I would see it.
Each of our lives is putting out a certain vibration or a certain message. And if you shared what you hope the message and vibration your life is putting out to people what would you hope that to be?
That's a beautiful question. I think I'd probably encapsulate it as you're sharing the light, sharing the love and light, something like that. Maybe making it a little bit more tangible. That's a little bit too ephemeral. Gratitude. Gratitude encapsulates so much of those sort of what I described earlier and those positive aspirations. Just, yeah, gratitude and being able to be on this marvelous planet.
It's very beautiful and touching. And I really, really appreciate our time together. And before we sign off, is there anything else that you would like to share that you didn't get to share, or any questions or input you have on anything? But I just want to really express my gratitude for sharing this time with you and just hearing your inner journey, which is so fascinating. And then also hearing about your row. And I know other things you've done in your life at a very high level, and seeing how you do it with such intention and such positivity and grit. You put a lot of grit and love into what you do. So I really appreciate you sharing your life and your experience. And if there's anything else you'd like to share, please feel free to.
I thank you, Jonathan, for the opportunity in being here on this podcast. And I think it's a wonderful concept. I love the title, and just it's a fantastic reminder of the fact that we're all spiritual beings on this planet and we can share our learnings and our growth with each other. And so my realization, actually, in speaking with you for the last hour, it's been an amazing way to reflect. Self-reflection is so powerful and something that I absolutely want to do more of. Even with the row, like I reflected, but it wasn't necessarily a conscious reflection like what we've done now. And 2.5 years later, I'm able to bring back those emotions and memories. It's a wonderful thing to, you know, remind ourselves and each other that, or just ourselves, that every day, just to reflect over the day, the end of the day. So, what did I learn today? What am I grateful for? And just how did it go, right? And that's a simple 5 minute reflection can be such a powerful thing to help us really embed the learning that we go through.
Like you said earlier about slowing down, because if you really slow down and get quiet and get with your breath, the answers, the intuition, the instincts are there. It's just when we're so busy internally, it's difficult. It's difficult to know what to trust and what to listen to. And so that reflection of just settling down and really asking the important questions about whether the day or something, a decision you're making, and just getting clear in ourselves. That's how this podcast started, of having these conversations and how much I love them. But like you're saying, even in the conversation, us getting to reflect on things that maybe we haven't reflected on yet, and just having the excuse of this podcast to discuss these topics for us to reflect and learn and grow. And then anyone that's interested to listen to reflect, learn, and grow. So I really
Absolutely.
appreciate our time together.